on to making the front hood or the engine cover for our Optimus Prime. And again, I like to start with one big piece of cardboard. Actually, this one wasn't as big as I would have liked, and it actually has a fold in here. So what I did, and what you can do if you have trouble finding a big continuous piece of cardboard, is as you're laying out the design of the actual piece, you can incorporate the fold right into it. A couple measurements that I'm going to share with you to make sure that this fits our cab is this will be the top of the engine. It is 10 inches wide. Let's just double check that. Yes, 10 inches wide. Good. Now I make it just big enough so that my kid's head will actually fit. So this here is 9 inches. This one here, 9 as well. 10 going this way. This little flap here is what's going to go slide into the cab. It's actually going to be your hinge. We don't actually use any real hinges on this design. So that is 4 inches here. And here, this represents the height from the bottom of the ground to where the wheel well is. To kind of give you an idea, the wheel is going to be somewhere along there. So we've got a height of 8 inches. Also here, 8 inches. Now you'll notice these little sections here, I've made a little 1-inch flap, and here as well. Those flaps are going to be used in a similar way that we did with our cab to actually construct our own custom-made box rather than trying to work with existing boxes. So if you can kind of visualize where this is going, the grill of the truck will be somewhere along here. And if we follow these lines, our headlights are going to be somewhere along here. So with our piece cut out, we're starting to get an idea of what it's going to look like. Now, a couple things that I wanted to mention is for this piece, I do like to use the double corrugated. It's a double thickness. It gives you a little bit of extra strength. And the other thing is the pattern of corrugation goes this way. I do that for a couple of reasons. And that one of the reasons is because this is going to be the front bumper. And the cardboard is a lot stronger this way than it is this way. You can see here, it could bend very easily. So if you bump into something, this is not going to be supported by anything. So it's important to have as much strength as possible. So if you have the lines going like that, that's going to be a big help. Also, most of the folds that we are going to be doing are going to be here. One, the little 1-inch flaps. So it's 1, 2, 3, and 4. You'll be doing 2 folds against the pattern, but it's better to do 2 that way than to do 4. So you'll get extra strength on your bumper, easier folding overall. And this little flap here, this is actually what's going to slide into the cab. This actually acts as your hinge. Just scour a couple of lines, including along this line here, and then we'll go ahead and fold all of these as well. So now that we've made all of our folds here, we've got our tabs folded, and we've got several folds made here. We can glue our pieces together. So we will just apply a generous amount of glue here. So now that we've glued both tabs in place, this is kind of what we end up with. So this will be our hinge. Also, just like with the cab, the reason why we do a single piece construction is it gives you a lot more strength. There's a lot less gluing involved, so it will end up being lighter as well. But also, you end up with very clean lines in the most important places, the parts that people are actually going to be looking at the most. Smooth out all of the crevices, whatever you want to call it. But that's mostly done. Just a very, very light sanding to smooth everything out. Whatever you can't smooth out, don't worry about it, because the latex paint will smooth out the last part for you. And we also finished the same here. As you can see, all the exposed edges have been sealed. Now, you'll see here how the hood attaches to the cab. And that's basically the hinge that you get. Now, I would recommend that when you do glue it into place, glue it so that it is in this position. If you glue it down like this and it's too tight, then there's a chance that it will not want to fold back. It's time to get started with the windows of the cab. Now, this is something that I purposefully left for later. The reason I did this was because some people might not want to do all that work. So, let's say for example, you decided to leave that side smooth. A very easy way to add windows at this point is to get a very thin piece of cardboard, paint it black, and stick it on. You would do the same for the front, cutting out pieces and putting them on each side. What I'm going to be doing is inserting another piece of cardboard underneath, which first I would paint black. And what that will do, that will give you a little bit of texture. You'll be able to paint the inside edge, which is the actual window frame, and the window will be sitting inset. With the front of the truck, the front windshield of the truck, you'll have to make a decision. Are you going to be happy just sticking on black, thin black pieces of cardboard to create the effect, or do you want some texture? If you want some texture, what I did is I took this piece of cardboard and the same piece that you used to make the stencil of the window, instead of using the actual glass piece, you will just use the frame. Notice I did not cut out windows into this piece, and the reason that I didn't do that is because that's an important structural component. When you end up adding the hood, it's actually going to be glued onto the back, and it's very important that that piece is not compromised. You need as much strength as possible. So unlike the sides where we can cut holes to create our depth, we're not able to do that here on the front. So instead, what we'll do is line it up with this slot here, and we will glue it down, and that will give us the same texture that we have on the side windows. And just as before, we can seal up all of the imperfections and cracks with some caulking. We've done a little bit of pre-painting here. This is the windshield. We're not actually doing Optimus Prime this time. The red windows are a giveaway. We are actually doing Nemesis Prime. We try not to make the same costume twice. Doing an undercoat just helps with the painting later on. But that's essentially what we're looking at. Now, I've already painted these pieces. So black on the inside, red window on the outside. All the way around. So it will just the way the light will hit it, you'll have shadows, casting, and it's just gonna take your costume to the next level. We're gonna paint this little inside edge silver so that there's a really nice contrast between the red windows for Nemesis Prime and the black body. Now, what we did with our original Optimus Prime is we actually hand painted the flames, which ended up being a lot of work. But we still followed the same basic rules. So you've got the solid section here, which was blue, and that's 1/3. And then the other section we did in red was 2/3. So once we got that 1/3 and 2/3 section painted, then we went ahead and traced out by hand the flames and painted them on top. It's usually a good idea to paint the undercoat in the lighter color because the blue covers the red very easily, but the red does not cover the blue very well. And on the cab, we did the same thing. So 2/3, 1/3, and then the flames happened somewhere in the middle. This time we're going to do things a little differently, painting the labels. Instead of hand painting, what we're going to do is make a stencil. And I have this here. They're called full sheet shipping labels. It's actually a sticker, a sticky paper, but it's not really paper. It's actually plastic. You can see it's clear plastic. So this last Christmas, we went out and got ourselves a new machine to make our life a little bit easier. And that's this here. It's called a Cricut. And it really opens up a world of possibilities for stuff that you're able to do. It's like a printer, but instead of printing, what it does, it cuts. So on our laptop, we found a design off the internet for a flame pattern, and we're going to go ahead and let the machine cut the flame pattern for us. And that's a lot easier than trying to either paint the flames by hand or cutting out a stencil by hand. And in just a few seconds, we're going to have a ready-made stencil that we're able to use to paint the flames on our costume. So what we end up with is a sticky paper here and a flame job here. Now both parts are usable. What you can do is once you decide which order of painting you want to do, you can use one for here and one for here. We'll repeat the same steps, making new stencils for the sides as well. And what we're going to do is just paint everything that is not covered in stencil, just paint everything gray. Now that our paint is dry, we'll try and take off our sticky stencil, and hopefully it's going to leave us with a nice flame pattern. We'll do the touch-ups along the way. So we're going to do the same thing with the cab, but in reverse using the other stencils. We've got the flames with the gray flames with the silver highlights. We've also painted around and did the bumper. We are ready now to do the grille. Now on the original Optimus Prime, we did this out of cardboard, and that was a little bit labor intensive because we had to put caulking all the way around to seal up the edges, which was a lot of work. This time we decided to use foam. This is EVA foam, very thin, and we're just going to glue that onto here. We pre-painted the black area so that you don't have to worry about painting it later. We can do the smaller details like the lights and the license plate after. So we are ready to actually install our two pieces together without any hinges. Once we have the final position that we're happy with, we're just going to glue all along inside there and glue this flap down. We have a very simple hinge, which basically folds like so. Now you may have noticed I cut out little notches here and here, and that just helps just in case if you have any problems with the actual folding. The higher you cut your notch here, the further forward your hinge will be. That will fold back. One last thing that you guys might have noticed that I might have forgotten to mention is that I ended up cutting out a little notch here. And the reason I cut that was for two reasons. We're looking for any possible way to save weight. Things can get pretty heavy pretty fast, so whatever you don't need, cut it away. In this case, the hand is going to cover that anyways, so it really doesn't matter. But the real reason that I did it is because if you have the cardboard going all the way here, this corner will end up getting stuck. And you might have a problem transforming, because when it drops down, there's always a chance that the corner will get stuck on the ground. So every single time, regardless of your position, regardless of your terrain, the hood is always going to fall down properly. We can now turn our attention to the bottom of the truck, or the chest of the robot. Normally this is a step that you can do quite a bit earlier. The reason we left it until now is because there's a couple different ways that you can make Optimus Prime's chest depending on what approach you want to take and how far you want to go. When we first made Optimus Prime, all we did was cut out a couple pieces of cardboard, painted them a different color, and stuck them on. Later, what we did is we actually cut out holes and took a big piece of cardboard and put it inside, painting the windows a different color. So here was red, and then inside is black. And what that did is it just gave that little bit of texture. So you have a window frame with the windows inset. And as time went on, we decided to improve even more, and we finally built in two opening doors with a storage area here, which was just big enough for our iPad mini. I was able to find an animation on YouTube. I did do some changes on it. I cut it shorter and zoomed in. This actually had animation with Optimus Prime in it. If you look really closely, you can still see his face there. But this was the only animation that we could find of the Matrix of Leadership. So after editing it, we just put it into one of our players and then loop it. So every 30 seconds it just runs forwards, then backwards, then forwards, then backwards, and then every time he just opens his chest and you've got the matrix. So actually making the holder for the matrix of leadership, what we did is I took a piece of cardboard and I measured out the dimensions of the iPad. The first thing, I use double thickness cardboard here, double corrugated, and that just gives me a better edge to glue on. If the cardboard is too thin, it becomes a little bit tricky to actually glue everything edge on. So these are about 3/4 of an inch, and that gives me just enough space for the iPad to sit, and I still have the iPad sitting a little bit inset. You do want to have a little bit of clearance. You don't want the iPad going all the way up to the edge. You'll also notice that I cut out little notches here. These notches are about 3/4 of an inch and maybe 1/8 of an inch here. And what that will be used for is for these little pieces of elastic strap. Now these elastics are actually going to be what holds the iPad in place. Now it's a good idea before you start assembling your pieces to paint first, because once you get the elastics in, it's going to be very difficult for you to paint in some of those areas. We've also finished off the open edges with silicone or caulking, and basically what we're looking for is a nice fit here. So here's the animation that we found for Nemesis Prime, which is the only purple crystals animation that we could find so far, using our black elastic bands, and this is why we cut out these little notches in the corners. What we're going to do is slip those through, and then we're going to apply some glue. And we're going to take the open end of the elastic and fish it through the other hole over here. So once we've got our elastics glued in, it might be a little bit hard to see since everything is black, but basically we've got a strap here and also a strap over here. Everything is glued on the back, and then we'll just slide our iPad in, pull our elastic straps, and you see it holds very firmly into place. So that's going to be the power source for Nemesis Prime. Optimus Prime has a matrix of leadership, but Nemesis Prime has dark energon crystals. So we've got all the pieces ready for our final bit of construction on the cab section, and that's to finish up our chest. So a couple things that I did ahead of time. I just taped off here. This is going to be painted silver. Also on this side. We'll work on the grill later. I also cut out this little piece here. Now I've seen some people, they actually put it here at the bottom because the real Optimus Prime has like these little triangle patterns and stuff in his crotch area. Originally I tried making it as a flap, but I found that also caused some problems during the transformation because sometimes it would get stuck. So we want the aesthetic, but we also want to make sure that we have a completely problem-free transformation. So I just put it right on top. And we're going to also paint that silver. Just like all the other cardboard pieces, I used some silicone or caulking, indoor-outdoor caulking, to give a nice finished edge. You can sand it lightly, but you also have an edge where you can actually apply some paint. And this last piece here, also finished with caulking all around. We'll put in a piece of cardboard to fit in the windows. This is just a very, very thin cardboard. You could even use thick construction paper because we don't want it to be too thick. And those will be the windows. And of course we already have our holder for the iPad. We have here some 3/4 inch wide black elastic. This is the same stuff that we actually used for the harness. We're going to use this as a spring action so that when the doors open up, they'll actually pull themselves back closed. You're also going to need, these are called ornamental hinges. They're the smallest, lightest hinges that I could find. And then the last thing that you will need, I got this from the local hardware store. It's flexible magnetic tape. It's adhesive on one side, and basically it's a fridge magnet. And what I do with that is I take some along the top and also along the bottom, and that will essentially make sure that once the chest doors close, they stay closed. Ultimately, we're also going to add the fridge magnet here and here. You'll have an elastic that pulls the doors closed and a magnet that keeps the doors closed. So we're going to go ahead and cut the opening in the chest to mount our iPad holder. So you want to give yourself at least 1/4 inch along the top here and along the bottom here. The reason being is that once we put our magnetic tape, it needs to be able to fit without overhanging on the hole. And essentially what we're left with is a hole which is the same size as this. Now you might realize here we have the foam sticking out, and that's one of the reasons why I told you guys earlier not to glue down the foam right away, depending on which approach you chose. If you wanted to make basic windows or go all the way with the matrix of leadership. So essentially what we're left with is something like this. The most important is for the opening to be able to connect with these sides. Here, 1/2 inch is about the thickness of a double layer of the double corrugated cardboard that I have, and there's enough of a lip here for you to glue. So initially the matrix of leadership is going to be glued from here and here. Eventually we will fill in this gap after we finish working on the hinges. 1/2 inch is also the perfect width that we need to attach our little hinges. So we'll have one hinge at the top and bottom, and also here at the top and bottom. There's also another reason why I leave this step for later on. As you notice, the box itself is actually getting very much like Swiss cheese. There's holes everywhere. You know, thin cardboard here, thin cardboard there. If you pre-cut all of these holes first and then try to fold the box into shape, you're going to have a very difficult time because the cardboard is just going to fail. So it's always important to cut as many holes as possible, but build your solid box, and then some of these extra holes that are going to jeopardize the structural integrity. Leave that for after it's actually assembled before you do it. I've glued the two pieces together, which is the thin cardboard underneath, which we painted red, and then the chest piece. And I've also pre-cut some of the magnetic strips. Now, these magnetic fridge magnets, they're actually self-adhesive, but I do find through experience that the adhesive does wear out a little bit. It doesn't hold very well. So I will still put some glue of my own. And then attach it. And we'll do the same at the top as well. Now it's a good idea to also mark the center lines. I've marked a little center line here and here. It's not easy to see on the black paint, but keep that in mind because you want to keep everything nice and even. So we've cleaned up all the edges and painted them as well. We put a little bit of green tape here to protect the elastic bands. We'll remove our sticky paper. And now that we're certain that this is the way that we want the magnets to be, we're going to apply some glue. We're going to take this off and flip it. And that way we know for sure the magnet orientation is exactly the way that we want it. So we do the same thing with this bottom piece. We just flipped it over, and now we just make sure that the orientation of the magnet is the same. So the last step will be to cut this in half and add the hinges for it to open. We have the doors here. I cut it in half, and I attached the small hinges, and I used the small little tacking nails to hold it in place, but there's still a chance that these can work themselves loose. So what I do as a final piece of reinforcement is I just take a piece of black fabric, and what we'll do is we'll glue it down so that you'll have these glued down from underneath and from on top, which should hopefully keep the hinges in place. The fabric gives a nice finishing as well as that little bit of extra reinforcement. And I use a fabric because I need something very thin, because if it's too thick, it's going to create a problem because you won't be able to actually close the doors. What I like to put is some elastic pieces here, and that's why I leave these little slots. I've glued 2 of them, and we're going to fish that through. We close everything up, and then we pull it tight. Pull it taut. And as you're holding it, we're going to apply some glue here and here. Not too tight, but not too loose. You're going to have to find that sweet spot for yourself. Essentially, what we're going to end up with is nice and taut. So every time you pull it open, it's going to want to pull itself closed. So with our matrix of leadership compartment finished, you may remember that there was a foam piece on the inside which we use for want to use for some padding. Now that we're done, we can go ahead and glue that into place, and that will serve 2 purposes. It's going to make it a little bit more comfortable for your child to wear, but it also serves as a bit of a spacer so that when your child is wearing the costume, it sits along their chest and does not tilt backwards. So we're just doing a few of the finishing touches on Nemesis Prime. We've put in the headlights. This was just some foam. On the original Optimus we did cardboard, But with the foam, when you cut it, you get a nice clean edge, so you save yourself a step, and we don't have to use the silicone or the caulking. We also use the same white foam for our license plate. So we've got here Nemesis on a Ontario plate, and we also used the foam for our Decepticon logo. So the only thing left to do now is up here, which is the marker lights. Now I've pre-cut a couple pieces to do that. There's several different ways that you can make the marker lights. I see that some people just use pieces of paper towel or toilet paper holders. We actually use foam, and we've got this stuff here. This is pipe insulation that you get from the local hardware store, and we use this for a couple of reasons. Most important is it's flexible and very forgiving, so that if your child bumps into something, there won't be very much damage. It tends to bounce back. It already has a gray color and a bit of a silvery sheen, so it can pass quite well for metal. We also used this foam to make originally the exhaust pipes for Optimus Prime, and we did so for the same reason. It's very flexible, and since they're going to be sticking out, there's a good chance that your kid's going to bump into something. So we found that this was a very forgiving way to put on some pipes that are not going to be prone to damage. With this pipe insulation foam, we would actually put a couple holes inside, and then we would make holes here at the top and at the bottom. So 2 holes here, 2 holes here, and then we can fish through any kind of string that you might have. What's really nice about this foam is that it's self-adhesive. So after you attach it to the body and tie it in, then you can very carefully seal that up, and that will give you a nice closed seam, and nobody will be able to see where you actually attached everything.